the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the complete destroyer, the perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knower of the world, supreme guide in the beings to obtain, teacher of paths and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to obtain, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the fully destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to obtain, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When O supreme advanced student, you are born on this earth, you paced out seven strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I prostrate. With you a body is formed supremely pure, constellation like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the three worlds, the winner of the best, Lord you, I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the three worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attraction, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime reality, to the Dhamma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three every devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the 12 faults and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness and death. To page 15 for the Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive altars mounted like a pillar, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the plenities of phenomena called profound perfection. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. The venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any sadhana be constrained who wishes to practice the activities of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that when the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon the practice directly and immediately beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, Shariputra, like all phenomena, are emptiness.
Disinterested, unseen, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, full. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition or factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, form, or touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye-element, and so on, up to and including no eye-element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no result of wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Taya Taya, Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, assurers, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. To page 25 for the short mandala. Sashi Poge Joje Meno Realisation Gandhari Sange Jingdu Mikte Uwagi Rokunanda Shimla Jubasho Jetsa Lama Dampa Kenamti Chukwe Gala Jinde Jinde Ne Jeda Zambe Dije Zema Saje Chuje Cha Abdo So Guru Rane Mendela Kanye Yataya Sanje Juna Zoji Chanana Chanju Bado Dani Kyasu Dagi Chujin Kiwe Sonam Ki Dora Benji Sanje Tugarash Sanje Juna Zoji Chanana Chanju Bado Dani Kyasu Dagi Chujin Kiwe Sonam Ki Dora Benji Sanje Tugarash Sanje Juna Zoji Chanana Chanju Bado Dani Kyasu Chujin Kiwe Sonam Tola Penche Sangye Tukash Yende Shiva Sanam Kushi Nishi Tenze Kanyina Dora Pemba Shina Namshi Nishi Dundun Sewa Kanda Yende Deme Tuna Namba Kode Nazo De Somba Yende Shishi Semba Suji Sanje Yine Yunde Yan Chakere Tuni Yende Sande Juwe Lama Shishi Sense Kanje Dundu Chana Pemba Dede Soha De So Shinde Dundu Ya Bande Zara Lama Rambo Chen Daga Yingara Pende Deshu So, assuming the correct motivation for listening to class, that one is not just listening for oneself, but solely to benefit all sentient beings, so that motivation should be one of the bodhicitta, the awakening thought of concern for others.
아야 다 가와 공라더니 문도 진행게다 값시비 나네 믹스에 전주선배 주기 연대 근데 제주도 되지다 거기 암절로 거기 총한테 겨워서 뭐 예스라
Let it rejoice that today one has the fortunate opportunity by listening to the Ornament of Clear Realization, the 4th chapter, for the qualities of the Bodhisattvas to fall in one's ear.
아야 다 체전스다 저에 체전 오니전스다 생이 넘버 시시요 전주선배 주기 연대기 마다 장가로지 체조시연데 나 체전서데 니버디 아니 전주선배 주기 람데다 년도다란 제글란데 아니 겨와파고데 간데레스 다디시기요 레스라
We are looking at the qualities in the mind of a bodhisattva from the perspective of these 4 headings or attributes of characteristics: knowledge characteristics, distinguishing characteristics, functional and entityness. We're on to the second of those, of the distinguishing characteristics, how those characteristics are superior to hearers and solitary realizers.
다딜라 기 참자와 도주도 심바체 텐시와 딜라다 네 다체와 숨 제주 숨지거네 셰요인데 네 딜레 체와 탄지거네 또 된바당 디용오거네 제와쇼와 매남 무슨 믿음에 태와쇼 숨요나네 당보 탄지거네 또 된바데 기생도 사르러 다 니와 제와 오거네 제와쇼와세 니발라 숨세데
So just recapping where we were last week, at the bottom of page 147, we can enumerate these distinguishing features. We can look at them in 3 sets. Firstly, by number or enumeration. Secondly, by their entity. Thirdly, by the explicitly not teaching the lower paths. We've been through the first one of enumeration. Now we're looking at entity, page 148. So that again has 3 divisions: making a connection, root, text, and commentary. Yes?
다 참자오데 셰운데 다 케와드 파고에나 케와드 파고에 제주도 가래에서 뒤외고는 참자오래서
Right. So a question then is asked, how are these features distinguished? What is their nature?
다데 자외셰인데 nga 지제되는 삼미 캡다 미냠 당사들이 산유미 잡아다 미냠 발라서 거다 자와디 셰로
So goes on to asked what are the distinctions of the inconceivable and so forth. So for example, the root text, first line, the inconceivable, the unequaled.
다데 somebody 되는 셰인데 네 직든 셰인데 삼미 캡세 지면데 네 산유미 잡아라서 거디 메줌zen 칼레스데 양다저고 산제라서 거스데 ane chanju simbe ju yilam te dala tene sanje ji gomba nyu de totu ya ge ane chejo yore ti go ne ane chawa de pawres ta di sheyang go resra.
Inconceivable because from the perspective of the cause, they mature to full Buddhahood. So the Bodhisattva trains, and those are inconceivable from the resultant stage of Buddhahood.
다 딜라야 단다 디 ngoyo go ne shewa de 참자와 자와 de sum yoye dila 난세기 망다 티어디 shewendu 안 체조 가르데 shewendu ane chejo de la ne dezen이 chawa ji ngo dang ane chawa de phagwa ni ji go ne ane shege resra.
Okay, so, you know, going more into this explanation of entity, we can look at the distinctions of the entities. Page 149 we are now, and then the subheading of superiority. So that twofold look at these entities.
다 chawa ji ngo shewa de la ane 동해 데모 군주 데모 곡네 람데 시제 다 뎀바 시지 ane 기즈메 고네 chawa de phagzu shege restarwa.
So then, in terms of the first of those, the entities of distinction, we are going through the Four Noble Truths, true sufferings, true origins, true cessations, true paths, the 16 attributes of those four.
다 동해 뎀바 단다 동해 뎀바 슬라위나 다 베낭 란저 chanju simbe juje ni 동해 뎀바라 동해 뎀베게 다 데라 저 미다 동아 다메 시 똑베 로지 딜 람르바다 미다 동아 다메 시 동해 뎀발라 미게 람냠니 그림바지 여러와 데다 주 도리스 되나 기신 셔나 시리 파제면나다 남들람시 디즈니 연구 여러와 근데 저게 체조의 동해 뎀베 체조 가르스 되네 산제지 시제의 규칙과 디 산제기 유시 이시제도야 체조인데 셰요레 동해 뎀발라와.
So in this context, here the Bodhisattva takes the first of those Four Noble Truths, true sufferings, and with a focus on emptiness, looks at the four first characteristics: impermanent, suffering, emptiness, and selflessness, and focusing on them sees how they are a cause, or focus on the way that they are a cause for the wisdom of a Buddha. No. Four exalted wisdoms of Buddhas. Yeah, so when we talk about these four exalted wisdoms of a Buddha, it is inconceivable.
nyamba machi wasnare ta de dunghe de meche je mida dunghe dong dame se ade de zo lo ko mo dame ro
dame ro agishla di mi nyamba be
de zo ne toge gi ju le de wa yin za ne ta de re mi nyamba mar da sam de la sanje shi ju che je toge ju le sam yi mi cha ba sa ne sam yi mi che ba na le ko cho go ra da pe na toge ju le de wa sam ji mi cha ba toge juile debe sanji mejawa wa sanji mejawa de la dezenyi che minyamba de la dezenyi chagmandwa toge ju sidu nga toge wa sidu nga ranzo da pena tanda didawre tingdu gi tsenrikba de zorwa
yeah
wa dinta mama ina ne hindu gi loben to zorwa khonzo khoranzo gyumze ji samna tanje tadub ji dinde gi yorwa taduji dinje ane diegi dala jale gene dotugu yo marwa dotugu me binda khonzo ge ane chuyu mares lago yo ta tanda duzu ne dungi dembe ge cheju tashi tawa minda dungi donga dame ge namsha dozo ane tingdu ge ngazo modern chenrikwa dozo ge ta luyu le dewarwa ta tingsa perawa shana toge wasine ta tidawre hindu chenrikwa dozo ngasum sukde ge rikba 통해 이거지 다 체제지 놈이 건도 캘링 거 말아. 금진 체제배다. 금진 제수 tran에 에네드나 즉 새벽에 도야게 에네 단다 캘링 시도고요 말아. 뭐 통해 이거 당 에네 배 체제 요지 간라야다. 캘링 지구로 미시지기 딜레 덕버디 동반이 세야도 체제게 요 말아. 건도 주일에 되어라 하시다. 도기 주일에 되어 있다. 사님이
Okay.
잡아 찍지.
We can also look at the inconceivability, relating it to the second point of unequaled. It can also be said to be the four wisdoms of a Buddha inconceivable, because if we look at those four attributes of true sufferings, which we said were impermanence, suffering, emptiness, and non-self, the last one of non-self, it is at that time we would have talked about logicians at the time of Buddha. The notion of non-self could not fit in their mind. And in a contemporary sense, if we look at scientists today, they want to see things normally with empirical reason. So they might say that you can't prove something because it cannot be seen. So it must be seen to be existent. But you can't induce a reason for something's truth without that empirical evidence. So that is part of its inconceivability as well.
사님이 잡았어야 되지. 다 미냠바
Sorry, that's the first. Now on to the second. No.
미냠바니다. 미냠바니 있어요. 미냠바니.
Nyambaya.
냠바만. 다제 가르치고래서는 벤다르메 충감에베 미냠바단서로. 제가 전주선배에게 아니 누den기 체주도야다서 네 년도에다 란지 규글람라 아니 빼샤롱아요 말이다. 빼샤요 말이다. 전주선배지 남도단 된데지리 빼나 년도 란지 규지 남도단 된데지 도가 슬라위나 빼코란 샤자요 말이었어. 어디시고
Unequal, since there's no similar analogy, what the bodhisattvas are realizing in terms of those four aspects of the First Noble Truth, the true sufferings, there's no analogy that can be shown to the hearers and solitary realizers that would make them get that realization, understand it.
선님이 저보다 미냠바지.
Minyambarwa nipadirwadi.
니버지. 다 양다벌레 대화서도 대화서는 좀 봐도
Yep.
티코너 체메 셰월레 양다버 대화. 티코너 체메 셰월레 양다버 대화. 티코너스도 동반이 도거와. 동반이 도고 체메 셰 양다벌레 대화를 메시지게. 아니 년도다 란젤라 단다 뭐란주로라 동이 도투고요 말아. 디시고다.
Right, so perfectly, the third qualification, perfectly transcending comprehension by valid cognition in suchness, solely recognizing the lack of intrinsic nature of things, this suchness which we know is beyond the scope from this school's perspective. They don't realize emptiness directly.
What are the four exalted wisdoms of a Buddha that this is referring to?
Sangegi. What are the four exalted wisdoms of a Buddha that this is referring to? Sangegi yeshishi dekare.
선제 시시디 다디니 춘이시 냠니시 저르위시 아니 요 태루비시
Teskogisla chunigi yeshi.
춘이시 냠니시 태루위시
Somebody?
태버르베이시
Tebadrubi.
저버르베이시 이시디니 디게
Gisla somebody youngish labda. Teba.
태버르베 태루비시 태버서 태루비를 봤어요.
Ditches labda.
태버서야데 아니 제와 인상 제와를 있어요. 계중만 인상
Distinguishing.
때내 좋은 인상 동반이를 있어요.
Consequence. Sorry, yeah. So the first one is the wisdom of the nature of things. The second one is the wisdom of equality. The third one is the wisdom of consequence. Shipadi? Kyapa.
냠니시 춘이시
Mari shipa.
원래 태루이시사 될 저루이시는 뒤로 그랬다. 내가 이싱하셔드는데 두스르다. 태루도 말랍대로.
Anene.
멜론데위시체.
Melong.
멜론데위시체 춘이시체 냠니시체. 아니 저루이시스 두스잖아 되고. 멜론데위시체라.
Yeah, melong tabu, chuni tabu.
멜론데위시 춘이시 저루이시
Chadrup.
저루이시
Accomplishing.
냠니시
Nyamni sene tanyom.
냠바니 최탐제 동반이 최탐제를 냠 산제 이시기 최탐제를 냠바 식투고요라 냠니
Okay, so sorry. Excuse me, let's try those four again. Mirror-like wisdom, the wisdom of suchness, the accomplishing wisdom, and the wisdom of equality. So this fourth one is that from the omniscient perspective, all phenomena equal in that they lack intrinsic nature. No, she. Not there.
그래.
남균 디 이시딩아 여러와티 두셰기.
테르위시디 니 저르위시는 누르고야.
Yeah, that what Gischler explained it as the wisdom of consequence, which I guess is discrimination, is subsumed in
저르위시.
in accomplishment. It is subsumed in there.
디라고요래도.
Those two are similar.
테르위시다 저르위시사디 라고요래도. 밀로 이시 가셔도 디샤고요라. 겨와체고요라. 이시 시샤는데 디아 누르고요도.
Right, so one can either posit them as 5 or 4, and if you posit them as 4, that one of discrimination or consequence is subsumed within accomplishment.
다디네 아니 시바디 대저발라서 탕기 탕월에 양다고 대베 동해지란 시스바 대저발라서 탕기 탕월에 대바 다 동해디베 제주도도 다네 단다 다 빔나베 미다 동해 동안 담에 다저 담에 가는 게 셰비나
Yeah.
단다 담에디 덴버드베 동해 담에들 샤워라 데네 탕 딘데지 요레 세제
Okay. So really this fourth one, perfectly transcending enumeration by counting such as those expressible in terms, we're really talking about the fourth of those four attributes of non-self and the fact that the non-self itself lacks true existence, cannot be expressed by counting.
어디 동해디메 체주를 미게 체와 파단이 시게요다 그렇다. 근데 년도란제기 아니 동해덴발라 미게다 람제단제요와 딜라 체주된데 상계요 말다 근데.
Right. So what we in terms of the first of those four noble truths, in terms of true sufferings, that's how those yogas for the bodhisattvas realizing emptiness are trained in. But the way that hearers and solitary realizers would train in their paths is different. Not like that. It wouldn't reach that level. So let's go now to the next one, which is true origins. We have to turn the page for that. 150. We won't go into the sutric sources here on the bottom of 149.
기후 케베리고 차원이다. 년들로서 주요 많이 배우고 연습해왔다. 란지룰라도 몸바시와 신주 뉴베 셰와스타 제주디 걔네 체와 받는 세션은 코디아 연습으로. 원래도 대전 셰블라스네. 자와디 년도지 대보다 란산지 대보다 시즌대 저에 도디시는 주의다 많이 넣어서 다 이시기요
군중래 상이든 인데기 때문에 개발도 바꿔되는 것. 디시라 데 유첸의 전에. 유첸의 전에 군중디 탕보디 gelpo기 콜레 페샤디.
이 도가 들어와. 도.
알레디 마체베체. Like just like ale.
Chana lies. Ta maring ye godin ma di.
Like ale di jela di kepa di call it like yembe.
Godin ma des me wan piji ma tu. Nivala ya se kunjun dembal shiro. Gebo tangyo se ne lumbe de chawa cheba darasra. Yumji midawa shindi fabai kansan tangje ji bangdo yunde tamje duba tang siyo ta di lago yore. Gebo tangyo se ne special ro. Kunjun demba. Gebo tangyo se ne lumbe de chawa cheba darasra. Yur midawa shindi fabai kansan tangje ji bangdo yunde tamje duba asla yunde. Ane yum shijin yirwa shijin ki tuen samu di tuba tang longboba tang sushi ila chewa da cheba yina. Ane dela dine kare yungo re labi yunde. Ane sanji yugoma toba di yungo yorwa. Ane ina ya chanchu senpe ge ane chanchu senpe lam nyamne che yungo dine. Ane sanji yugoma ngwa su top da chigoyo mara dele. Ane pena gyabu lega ma chewa dedina. lumbu gyabu chawa chewa dina shi. Ane pagwaya kansa tekwa chenpo chanchu senpa duze chawa chewa di. 산제 ngos 산제 기다 배 도약 내가 지고 만들고 주네 산제 내가 제야 되거든 지고를 해서 봐 뒤고네 아니 겨와도 받던 시기 요래서 빼고네 봐
So these distinctions are given in terms of analogies. The first one is just as a king abides passively while his ministers perform his tasks, likewise while the mother does not conceptualize, it incorporates all the qualities of abandonment and realization of all Arya persons. The analogy here is that the bodhisattva, whilst relying on the mother, meaning the perfection of wisdom, by questioning it, studying it, knowing it, meditating on it, creates the cause for Buddhahood, whilst they don't, reach Buddhahood straight away. In terms of the great vehicle, they're still able to do all those other things. So that means that remaining in the wisdom attribute is the analogy of the king abiding passively while the ministers do all these other tasks. Yes.
아니 기억해버려 보시는 투무 많이 배켜버려 봐 자주 선배지지 배나 군중 덴벌람이 배다 최소 제수인데 여러 어디 다 통람이 내가 파자면한다 남들랑 인데 용고 여러 대단도서 아니 녀랑이 주 많이 배서 왔다 대마도시나 투무 많이 배켜와 녀랑이 주 많이 배 주의 많이 보거든 오버 싸워다 자체에 용수해 봐 싸워다 자체에 보내 싸워서야 돼 ane 동반이 야채와서데 chanjusem다 닌지 몰라서 버테다 년도에다란 얘기 주의 말해서 된대지고네 ane 겨와디 파고 차레스
니페디
단대다가나 올도 당연히 빼셔야봐
Yeah.
기후 개별이 버져야 되는 시대와 시바당 두모 많이 배켜와 여러지 주의 많이 배고 싸워다 자체와 연습쇼 만나와 유배 켜와데 군존dembe 유지
디썸바 말베 니페디 탑케바 당데바 니파
기후 개별이 버져야 되는 시대와 시바서들 니와
어디 디
기후 개별이 버져야 되는 시대와 시바
노스
다단다디 chanjusembe 최소 제소저로
Yeah.
기후 개별이 버져야 되는 시다 chanjusem바도 저기 람시바데 아니 개발 론다 덴바도 시바처럼 메시지게 로다마 덴바다 로다스나 로도 교 년도다란 예도 시다워시 시바도 말해서 시고래
Right, so that second point of knowing accordingly the meaning that is to be known by skillful beings, that Bodhisattva's path can only be known, detailed, fine, and clever by those with a skilled primary consciousness, not that those who don't understand it.
니와디시라
Yep, sumba.
다 숨바 투무 많이 배켜봐 여러지 주의 많이 배 ngobo 싸워다 자저 용시 봤어 다 투무 많이 배켜봐 년도다란 제 주의 많이 배 ngobo 싸워 동반이다 자체와 아니 전주심다 니지 좀 몰라서 대다셔 용시 봤어 전주심 배주 전주심 받다 알아
The third one is fully knowing the uncommon distinctions, profound and vast properties that are not objects of utility of hearers and solitary realizers, such as great compassion, loving kindness, these vast attributes.
다드네 만화와다 뉴에 개발시와 this 만화와 다르와데 동반이기 퇴한치다와 시에바이나 네 만화와와 네 동니도과들 당 전주기 닝지 전부다 전주심라서 요 인자 산지 고마 뉴드토야 된대기 개화되 뭐 요 인자 아니 이런 저월에 개화도 파고 레스다.
The fourth is that the knowing the distinction of being unmistaken and quick by relying on studying the mother, the perfection of wisdom and so forth, it is the best and quickest route to Buddhahood. And that path is separate from the hearers and solitary realizers. But it's also unerring. So those are the distinguishing attributes of true origins. Going on now to distinctions of instance of true cessations, page 151. Knowing that all phenomena in the entity of conventional truth are without decrease.
마데와 최랑랑랑랑기 모멘다멘다멘다를 연구여라와 텐데스데 군조되면 오라 텐데 요레스로.
So all phenomena that have their, on a conventional level, that have their distinctive attributes are without decrease.
안데네 턴담바 덴뱅오 최탐제 강화매워데 누구단 되었지마 턴담바 턴담베 덴뱅오 최탐제 아니 덴버드뱅오 최탐제 요마라와 하나로 제산디 누구단 되어 누구스데 덴버투와 덴버투와레 세데 요마레스 테단 테오레스 군데스데 덴버투원 메나 메고마레 세데 테베 아니 최탐제 따제 타니레테
Two extremes. Yeah. This next qualification, that all phenomena in the entity of ultimate truth are without increase, without superimposition and deprecation. So free from the two extremes. When we have superimposition, we make a non-existent thing to exist. And if we deprecate, we make an existent to not exist. So free from those two extremes. All phenomena, because all phenomena lack true existence, they are free from those two.
아니 나다다 전주선벽에 조배 냠린 체윤디는 짐바다야다 주릉소야다 짐진소 파진 두 냠린 라윈디 아니 짐발라 짐바당 용디 짐바 볼어서 따외 콜숨지 틈만 남바 타고 진소지 출라 메와 쳐바다 잡디두에 쳐버시바스디 다 콜숨메스디 짐바다세 유체 짐베제체 짐바체 어두즈 상마 아니 덴바 마주베고네 다즈디
The next distinction is that when, for example, giving generosity and so forth, are free of the stains of the three spheres, viewing the giver and so forth. So the Bodhisattva here trains in generosity, knowing that the recipient, the object, the substance giver, and themselves, the act of giving, lack inherent existence. So that's the emptiness of the being sullied by the three spheres, or clinging to the three spheres as being truly existent. No.
다 양다고 코스um 넘버 타고 와서 양 타고 버렸어요. 다 넘버 타고 저에 깨워두면 되면 양 타고 와서 동반이 템바 모두에 거네로 코스 넘버 타는데다 템바 모두에 거네 타고라. 근데 저와 제인데 깨워두면 되베. 저 소남 로압 첨부 소도야. 아니 이 시기 처랍 첨부소야. 그러나 jimba dangwa di sonam so sayang warwa. Ta jimba dangwa jimbe ze dang, jimba dang, jimba kutuzu sama kosumen tema madruwe sama dangwa di ishiji so sayang warwa. Odi shigur.
The next point 11 is that having understood that for example, the object, the recipient, the substance, and the giver equally lack intrinsic nature, then the two collections of merit and wisdom can be accrued with that understanding, because from the merit side, we've looked at the emptiness of the three spheres of that action, but with that action, wisdom is collected because of that understanding. No.
Oda di kokden la dimbe kyawa padan shidi che ro.
Chiklahtu. Mata chiklahtu. Tamatama shipa, chunipa. Perfection of wisdom. Parudu chumbalatene.
Shiji midowa zime.
Ale mazimba.
Chesuji. Di nan dudu. Shimbe es namba midowe jinsoji che tamje la sa migne sa shiji midowa zime. Migbe cheba. Ta jimba la sawe che tamje la shimba nambar midowa, shimbe nambar midowa sile. Ani temba matuwa kone, temba shimba mebe kone. Ani ta yondi migbe chane ani shijimido kapdi shijindi dungnido ba sherabla kogo ra. Chezan ko jimba tangi ani khaso ore tongbani nyamlen chedo yumi za migbe chane ani kyawa phadu shegyo res ra.
So for this one, because as one is giving, one is also understanding the wisdom consciousness, realizing emptiness. It is free from conceptualization, and there's no clinging to that, no adherence.
Tadi aranzo tandere wa khaza. Khandel chidu inare, komja de inare, koina samlo de tan thumna thambo. Yago yorwa lamsan da samlo yongo mardile tenshe gujerwa. Penang zo komja de ina ne ga komja ni rani che komja migba che komja chu che da du sangma ne demba mato yin sam. Wa ne je geje shegi na geje shewo bo khang geje sheya geje nyenge wa du zo ne demba mato yin sem wa na ran zo kala raji na kala sawo bo ne kala saja kala sawa wa du sangma demba mato yin ko du sangma la sam da ya wa yin ji min ji 전주 선배 냠는 체는 요지고 그저 뭐 단도드네 kumshi 소고라 그래서 뒤주 kumshi 전에 매자 알아 삼로 코지 파셔 칸에 틱라베 그런 카부도 제가 근데 도스 당보 체라네 kum시제 안 제라고 잘라 통인데 계제 시대에 있는 가도이네 두 대비나 아니 그 저자 녀도 가르쳐베 있나 시진기 슝 전주 선배 최단되네 아니 냠낸 체도고 여러와다 그래서 먼저 랍젤랭고 여러들어
We should try and take from this, and we should think before an action with mindfulness about these three spheres, whatever we engage in. So for example, when you meditate, you, the meditator, what you're focusing on, and your meditation, focal object and the process of meditating, all equally lack intrinsic existence or true existence. The same when we are talking to someone. So, we who are talking, what we are saying, and the listener, those three equally lack intrinsic existence. And it's the same with the food that is being produced and eaten, that threefold process. So any habit that we do all the time, it doesn't have to be thinking, just the bodhisattvas and emptiness are doing this training. We ourselves can do it, but what's difficult for us is that even to say the words from the mouth is difficult. So we need to train in that first. And once we've trained in understanding those three spheres, then it becomes just your habit, whether you are going whether you are sleeping, whether you are staying, then your mind is getting closer to the perfection of wisdom. No. Yeah, so that's a piece of advice that we could take from this type of teaching. Lamden la e.
Tenji chewa shewa shiwadin.
Nisan.
Tenji chewa
Sorry,
shewa.
Gishna.
Tenji chewa shewa sarwa. Ane matsawa mewe chewa shewa. Yunsa ronya mewe chewa shewa de. Lamdenji yujinji chewa so shi chewa dunbare sarwa.
We moved on now to distinctions of instance of true paths, page 152. There are 4 of those: knowing distinction of support, knowing distinction of not incomplete, knowing the distinction of complete upholding, and knowing the distinction of not relishing the taste. No.
Tenji chewa shewa se de. Chuji yingi ngoni sembe ten shewa sarwa. Chanchu sembe juye ne sembe chunyi de. Tanda de tijen drupe ten rashi ne rik jiyo pena nganzo sanjegi jidanda nganzo simgi juyo chunyi de re de le da. Chanchu sembe juye simgi dingu chunyi de rigya se yungo ra da. Chunyi ngogo sembe ten chunyi ngogo ni sembe ten tang sarwa.
Knowing the distinction of support, the bodhisattva here, the mind's final nature, vacuity, its suchness nature. Actually, all of our mind's final nature is that voidness, but this is qualifying that.
그래서나 chanchu sembe juye semde 다 남지의 균을 로고 열어다 간다봐. 그 다다 로데기 요인자 대딩기 춘이돼야 아니 산제주지 최주고 뭐 주두고 열어봐. 제가 이 디시기 열어.
Here we're identifying the empty nature of the bodhisattva's mind that is the direct cause of the omniscient Dharmakaya mind of a Buddha. That's what's being highlighted by this support.
다들 네 마타와메메 켜와스 라윤데 네 면란라서 파르디 심바로와 진소파지 푹 진소파지 줄라서와 대다하게 규 아니 규조 장자성 인자 규마상메와 가리 규마상 산제토야 규마상메와데 아니 전주심베지 람냠네 쳐와들 요 인자 대군의 켜와도 파고레 시행도
The training in the path, the second point, knowing the distinction of not incomplete. Everything is complete in terms of the causes that go to the resultant state of Buddhahood by means of the 6 perfections and so forth.
다 숨바 용수에 겨와서네 가서는 개외신이 탑지 용수 와서데 태고침배 개외신이 탑 용수 와서 다디 시기요.
And this third one of knowing the distinction of complete upholding the method of good reliance on the Mahayana spiritual friends.
디 도와체나 언조 장심 장족에 답배나 장족의 셈 줄레제요나 니 초두그즈네 당한 것은 인투도 알아 장주 소람 전람도네 초두고
알겠습니다.
초두그즈네 당한 인투고 여러 거 근데 문도진 대중 문도진도 도게 최대체 뒤정문에디 아니 장주 셈버 엉본nom버도 좀 시작해요 말이야.
알겠습니다.
장주 셈버들라다 엉본nom버들 나세고 언디 엉본도도 니샤로 엉보두다 넘보다 대단 정도의 내리 있어도 장주심 다들 상황 대정원도지 최대죠 뒤정원 소인데 장주심바 년도 란젤레 장주심바도 엉보 넘버와 이나 코란 나세래야 대지 엉보 놀 대지 용거라 장주심바 남편줄로라 디 엉보두다 넘보 당시제 어느 추지시나도 언디 대진다 시지 니 용거여들래 란신지 엉보도 뭐 임버와 제가 예 문도진지 최대지에 되저디 장주sem바 총람전람이시 용거와 말했잖아. 네. 제 장주심 줄에 깨와다가 대고침배 개외신이 용 송서야 돼. 근데 그거라네. 야 사당고 장신 총람도 차나 롱구전에 최년도도 알아. 롱구. 그다음 하나도 단다. 아니지 프로그램만 망고 그네. 지진 잠배한 셰세우레 지진 드라마 셰세레 차나도지 셰시리 세아도스 가르스나 두즈즈네 추니 두고 열다 간다. 예 사통부 톱사에 다된 거 같더라. 난 지진 잠배한테네 추니한테야 장선 통람 사통부 톱사나 안 지진 잠배한테네 먼저 추는 것은 년두고 열어라. 그래서 이양지 먼저 망고지다 지금 남동거 지진 잠배한 셰시네 추니 샤다. 단 디미시 매외 소리도 수수이나 마음바야 남줄지제네 사통부로 톱나 지진 잠배한 거 셰시제네 디진의 추응은 이해한데
Yeah,
요래서
gisla sok lampa tang jo lampa
초두네 당은
choki tuku.
초두스데 초두고데 다 다자도 마셔지 더라
Ale di nusu niem berbe.
아
Din di kalap niem berbe.
무엇이 년도 고요 무엇 초두는 당한 무엇이 년도 네 먼저 이제 최대저 뒤져라야 돼 뭐된 된제가 뒤져당 뭐된 무엇 된제가 뒤져줘라 세상한테 시진이 도도서 용달에 매왜 줌진데래다 한다 좀 된데 셰수베걸 시진이 도디 용달에 숨문도 줌진 가르스나 야 처럼 저런 톱차는 메시지 뭐 시진이 도디 녀야가 누룽 차기요 말아 디시고
So chanji semba sok lampa tang jo lampa.
초두글 당한 것은 인도 오레스
Ale nien tukul be.
투투지
Peshana.
단다 디시고도 단다 디 다자도 메시지 되 천신 유에서에 참바던 잠배양의 찬나도지던 군주 상보던 도주 상화 아니 대장야로 봐. 안단다디 람조당 도주 상모로 봐. 지진이 최대죠. 두자도
Okay, so di gisla teaching gi shewe tin timbala yang ta par tembar wadi dike shewe yerba sumpa dirba.
용성하시데 개외신이 용성.
Yeah, di lab ko radi ko.
개외신이 수레서나 어디?
Yeah. So here we're still looking at upholding or completely upholding, relying on the spiritual friend in terms of the Mahayana spiritual friend. Really, these teachings of the ornament are aimed at the bodhisattvas who are on the paths of accumulation and joining. And once they get to that level, they can hear the teachings directly from the Chogituku, the supreme Nirmanakaya wheel turning Buddha, such as Buddha. And we would say that is for like the sharp facultied ones to be able to hear that and understand it. Because in a general way, you can say that the bodhisattvas have sharper faculties than the hearers and solitary realizers. But even within the bodhisattvas themselves, there are different levels of intelligence. As it says in the root of the Ornament of Clear Realization, there is sharp, middling, and less so in terms of the bodhisattvas themselves. So when they get to these paths of accumulation and training, of course, they enter the great vehicle on that first path of accumulation. Then they can hear directly from a Nirmanakaya wheel turning Buddha, such as Shakyamuni Buddha. And then we know that once they reach the first bhumi, which is the Mahayana path of seeing, then they can hear teachings directly from the enjoyment bodies of a Buddha, such as Manjushritara, Vajrapani, directly. That's why it is often said that, this Shiragi Paradicambadi, Yongsu Choba Juyom Marivas. Rava? Yom Sayati. The Yongchot ki call Sungim Duas. Yongchot ki.
용조스나?
They take member than the lab to
야래 두제 용달래 용.
Yeah.
용달.
Duce Yonda.
투모 많이 봐미시 투모라 요 말했어.
Yeah, so that's why it's said often that this mother, the perfection of wisdom, is uncommon for a particular vehicle. It wasn't taught like publicly.
제가 좀 전에 당고 내시춘고 송 시진이 도 마송와서 하잖아. 단다 공화대 상보도서 시진 그 돈이야 최대제 두지차기요 말아.
Okay.
sunguyo
Okay. So, for example, when Lord Buddha first turned the Four Noble Truths, the first wheel, those in the retinue, those 5 close ones, weren't ready yet to hear the perfection of wisdom gone beyond.
다드네 시바데 로냐메베 켜봤을라로 알레 로냐메월라데 갈라드나 덴바셴베 로냐와메바슬라오라 덴바셴 전주 셈바드 저게 칼라드마스나 덴바토베 쳐 삼무코노 당기요 말 로냐와메바슬라 덴바셴바 로냐와메바스 이셔.
So the next one is the knowing the distinction of not relishing the taste. So, not tasting something that's truly existent.
한조 단다 덴바도 젠장 사제 되제 내가 줄라다 둥기 거래.
For us, we're always eating as if the food exists truly and we suffer because of it.
전주에서 말이지 덴바도에 삼루치는 당겨 덴바 마시메 거네 젠장 삼단도 거요.
Yeah, but bodhisattvas will eat with the understanding that what they're eating is pacified of any type of inherence. So.
어디지 다데네 디 난세게 켜와고 오셔와다 아니 켜와데 파고서야 돼 니바데 켜와데 파고서야 돼 켜와데 파고 다단다디 니바 켜와 파고데 네 강게 남네 신달레 켜데 파고 켜와람사 자와들어 다 강이 년도라서 왜 남나 전주선배 남네 네 남이 니 켜와데 전주선발라서 왜 남니라 속바스데 네 켜와 케슈베 라미베 케슈was 다 케어 가르쳐 버려서 라미인데 케와니 지고네 케와슈와 케와니 가르서나 아니 전주선배로지 람데다 아니 탑지찬에 케슈와당 셔럽지찬에 케슈was 라나 코데에서 따라와 아니 탑지찬에 아니 탑 닝지 전보다 전주선다 진소파진 두근냠네 제외찬에 아니 년도에다란젤레 케와티 케슈고 아니 사와 달하고든다 오마란주 로이나 년도다란젤라 돈이도에 매베인자 이찬에 케와디 케쇼바사데 텐데코스라.
Now we're looking at superiority on page 153, how those paths are distinguished by their superiority. The paths are paths of distinction because they are superior to others. So if we look at the difference between the bodhisattvas, yogas, and those of the hearers and solitary realizers, the method, we can look at it, the superiority in 2 ways, in terms of method and wisdom. The method is that they will train in great compassion, loving kindness, the 6 perfections, distinguishing the method side from hearers and solitary realizers. And how's the wisdom superior? Well, from this point of view, those hearers and solitary realizers don't realize emptiness completely as the bodhisattvas would train in doing. Yeah, so that brings to a conclusion entities. Right. Yeah, so remember we had these 3. Yeah, I have to go to the beginning. Yeah, we had these 3 distinctions, these 3 categories. So looking at it by way of enumeration, distinguishing features, and then by entity, and then explaining the correctness of not explicitly teaching lower paths, we're up to that 3rd one, page 153.
Ni 대시 대다야게 니 셰베 캬바단테베 몬바르 셴발라서베 기베 친이지 걸려다 간라야 네 제주 셰샤바데 몬바르 셴바단 테바슬라이데 아니 덴바토바 셴베 코네 아니 덴바마투베 코네 아니 덴바 셴바데 파카 덴바 마셴베 코네 덴바 메바 토베 코네 아니 초 캬바데 파즈디 멘조게 캬바슬라인데 년도다란젤라 덴데 요마르와
Right.
년도 란제도 덴바 셴네 최념네 제로 요르와 고디 덴다 Demba science du. Ta chanju semba de zoge, and tende demba mashime kone chaba yinza, and menjo ki chabare. Ta duzu she kodebo do ngarge, di deshe di jenane, nyendo jila, chanju sembe lam duzu, ji, nyendo da ranjele chawa de pakzu di sebo haku kudowa, ti yinza, dela jebo shek me sun sharwa.
It is said here that it is not necessary to give a vast explanation of the differences of why not explicitly teaching the lower paths, because it was said that to some extent, the hearers and solitary realizers train in the lack of self by still clinging to a notion of true existence. But the bodhisattvas do not train. They train on the emptiness of all. So therefore, because that was highlighted in the entity part of it, it doesn't need to be elucidated here.
Ta shungduen dirwa, shungduen yorwa dirwa.
Yeah, so now we come to the meaning of the text, bottom of page 153.
Ta di gana bangu she songa, ta be gui kursang dirwa. Ta zui dogdo sogore.
So a lot has been gone through, and now the summing it all up together comes easier, right?
Ta nyumon daso gembe simbe nenju juru chöjen. Ta dire chanju simbe juji. Ani denshimida so juru dogbe lo jorwa.
Yeah.
O digi cheshirirwa. Ani nyerang jowa le chawa de pawa yindeese, jowa yindeese. Ta nyendo daranjegi. Ani tindegi, ani jowa de le chawa de pawa res. Gyumzen khares la yinde, ani kola ya ta sanyu mi jowa la suwe yinde mangbu she songa. Sami chapso ji chawa de chibe, ani simbe nenjo yinbe chesta. Gyumzen thagrare ta, chawa ko gyumzen derta.
Right, so summing that up with the definition. What is the subject? The subject is the 16 bodhisattva yogas that are devoid of affliction, signs, and so forth, are the applications or trainings superior to the trainings, applications of hearers and solitary realizers, because they are bodhisattva yogas distinguished by what we've been through, such as these notions of inconceivability and so forth, unequaled. No.
Nyendo daranje jugi, nyumo daso gembe simbe nenjo juru yorwa.
Yore.
O tidang, chanju simbe juji, nemje tinyi ni di che yundi, chanju simbe juji, nyendo daranje de le chawa de fawo yungi kakana, sanyu mi jawsi di, di gongla ya sanje ki yu chawa da, sawa da, kya chawa da, ta kecho mangbo she songa, tende yinzang, chawa de fawo res.
Right, so there, we can say, we can ask why they're inconceivable. Well, both of the bodhisattvas and the hearers and solitary realizers have to train in 16 yogas. But if we look at the way the bodhisattvas train, because the way they train directly is a cause for Buddhahood, then it becomes inconceivable. We distinguish by the inconceivability of the result and cause. Yeah, it says the sign is the definition of the predicate.
Yes.
Aladi tadi kredi joshijero.
Tadi karesina yimbe chirlapsonga. Te tare sanyumi jewa so kyawaji simen jo yimbe chizade. Ta cherwa.
Right, so the sign is where it says yogas distinguished by inconceivability and so forth. That is the sign.
Tadi sewasa de karesina nyendo nyeranji jowa le kyawaji pawa jowa yimbe chizade.
And what is being defined is that they are differentiated from the yogas of hearers and solitary realizers. That's what's being defined.
The
first point is the subject. Take the subject. The bodhisattvas yogas that are devoid of afflictions.
Tadi kodewa she na pobadi cheshirira. Pobadi. Ande midawa yendes du seware da. Gimzen shera. Gimzen ra yimbe tiwatira da yendes. Yimbe gimzen khare shere na ne gejingma yimbe chis ta adrwa chana. Gejingma midawa tsinirago.
So it's a bit like, let's say, take this cup, which is the subject. The predicate is the cup's impermanence, and the sign would be because it's momentary, which is the definition of impermanence. Something like that.
that's also. 다들 티진이 저에 체전들라 주로 요대에서 봐. 디데도에.
Do.
네, 텔라 디시 유진 shesu 게지마 주로 겨와드 제베 주로 요외제 디시 유진 shesu 게지마 주로 디시 유진 shesu 다 유를 제도 미다서 미다동에 동안 다음에 주로 샤워라.
Yeah.
유진을 수자연데 아니 shesu 게지마 주로서도 바제멜람 제다 남들람 제샤오다.
Okay, so now we can look at these distinguishing attributes of the Mahayana application being 16. So let's say, for example, let's take the object. We can look at it from the side of the object, which when we take true sufferings was impermanent suffering, empty and selflessness. But we can also look at it from the subjective side, the side of the consciousness or object possessor, 16 of which last week we had those twofold divisions of 8, isn't it?
되발라다 되바게 만원저 되발라 여러와 동네데 먹은지는 봐 여러와 안텔라 미베다 되베 미주르다 여러와 되베 세두기 다 여러와 체베이나 인테 베나 동네데 발라 미베 아니 동네데 메체전을 남대당 가서 바제면하시다 남들남 직체 알리 덴바시 여러와 동네데 먹은지는 거든 남대 시체 이실라 되발라 되베 세두기 되베 세두스나라 되베기 ည모를 ည보되니 바제멜란시 남들란시 예차송아 한데네 수단 수메니 컴컴마 수단 수메니 직스탄제 바제멜란시나 남들란시 예차송아 제니 주루 예수 계지만 주룩사데 어딜라고 요레스로 기승지 셰셰바
So we can look at this just to give an example. You have both an uninterrupted path and a liberated path for each of those groups. So you've got true sufferings, true origins, true cessations, true paths, and each of those. Well, last week we looked at Tiskua, Dukden, Kunjung,
람딘 고딘
Shiurwa.
실미베 바제멜란시
Oh yeah, so each of those four, if we're focusing on them, let's say for a desire realm practitioner, each of those four has an uninterrupted path or a liberated path attributed to it, or a forbearance and a knowledge, whatever way you want to do it. So that makes 8, doesn't it? But then we can also approach it from the Kasa Suktang Sumikam.
수단 수메니 감직제
Yeah, when we put the form and formless realm practitioners together as one.
덴바실라 미베 바제멜란시 남들란시
Yeah. And then they're also focusing on the Four Noble Truths. And for them also there will be 4 uninterrupted and 4 liberated paths, making 8 for them, and 8 and 8 are 16. So that's how we have these 16 yogas for the bodhisattva to train in.
베나 진시직 셰위나 베나 먼저 동해 덴바로라 진시직 셰위나
Yeah.
먼저 동해 그 풍부디 따버지용도
Yeah.
따버진베 냠볼라 카레 미다고라 미다고 따고라
Yeah.
어디 다 미다고 또베디 냠보체로 따버진바디 방자디 셰로 근데 냠보텔레 덴베 남들남지 용고로 어디 시가
So let's give an example of the first level of true sufferings. We would take the form aggregate and we might cling to its permanence, but we know that we have to apply an antidote to abandoning that clinging to the permanence of the body to realize its impermanence. So that realization has both an uninterrupted and a liberated path to it. So that's how you would sequentially go through the 4 truths, both with a uninterrupted and liberated path to each of those realizations. So that's probably distinguishing characteristics done. That third one now is functional characteristics, page 154. Page sana. Yeah, so if there are questions, let's go for that. And perhaps the functional ones we'll leave for next week. How are we going? Philippa or Britta?
Okay, well, there was one comment there that the bodhisattva is superior to the hearers and solitary realizers in terms of their realization of emptiness.
Yes.
But I'm just curious because Lama Tsongkhapa says in the middle way, I believe, I think in his commentary to the middle way,
Yes.
that the hearers and solitary realizers, or if they achieve the path of seeing, they must necessarily realize equally to the bodhisattva the lack of inherent existence phenomena.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how Visala, if he can comment on how that fits in with this saying that they have a less superior realization.
Right. Thank you. So the question was, it was mentioned that the bodhisattva's understanding of emptiness outshines or is superior to that understanding of the hearers and solitary realizers. However, in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, commentary on the middle way, yeah, he mentions that for the hearers and solitary realizers to reach the path of seeing, they must realize the lack of intrinsic nature, just as the bodhisattvas have. Is that the question? Yeah. Gesla tiwa dire, tenganza tendalaya di chanjuki semgi tongni ki tokpa tang rangsangi dan nyentu ki tongni tokpa la kepa yorwas. Ina yang Lama Tsongkhapa oma jukpa ina karina trawa chiknang la te khelde rangsangi dan nyentu tonglam le du kunzu tongni di toya di rangani chupa meba tang chanju semgi rangani chupa meba chikpa chikyang des.
Ade uma tinju lurwa kiran shen. Uma tinju lula pagola doni de charwa. Tandang de pajin de uma ranju lul shigi lurwa.
Yeah.
To uma ranju lula yana yang 당분이 내 년도에 남슈도니 되죠. 그 돈이 더 말해라 거래.
아마랑규파.
이나야 돈이 지 요래서 거래. 그래서나 티진 남라슈 돈이 또 장주쌤 냠제 마 티밀라슈 돈이 저러. 찍제 니제 요르다데. 야 당고네 남 년도에 슈니데 돈이 마더에 차래. 얘랑 돈이 아마랑규벨라 돈이 마더에 차래. 한다 사당고 이제 돈이 더 캡사데 캡으려서야데. 우마 틴줄로 시고. 우마 틴줄로라 파과이나
what you are commenting on is what Lama Tsongkhapa means is that from the Madhyamika Prasangika perspective, if you're an Arya, you have to realize emptiness. So that does fit for that. But from this school's perspective, which is the middle way autonomous, the hearers and solitary realizers, according to this, don't set out initially realizing that level of emptiness. They have to traverse it. So one way they might do that is to laterally enter the great vehicle and realize emptiness in that manner, according to this middle way autonomous perspective. But yes, if you are kasa telgupa, you know, from the if from the perspective of the middle way consequentialists, to be an Arya, yes, right, you must realize that emptiness, exactly same.
Yeah, da drilling the any tanda de dugden kunjundemba lamden gogden shila sheju shi gune kyawa padan sheso.
Yeah.
Tade magic da pajasharo wana zone jig magic lo. An de gadugi dotende do. De dode waro. Nge tanda do mashallah. Chanaze dode malo shi da fijin tanda ge dewa jawdane sikdije de kogri khala kanza ro.
Yeah.
안 고급 민도 나나네 제일 직디 갈라베어스 티오티우나 하디 전다도도디 셰사와 인자 인디나라다 되고 쿵다 멍부지 셰 연구요 도다 되고 나는 뭐 직도 셰 데마 로시다와 데 당부 당흥에라야 전다디 야고직 심바체 시디 카르도 심바체
Yes.
아니 디디 야고 신사스나 아니 얘네마 시지 마빠지마 차단지 로다 아니 수수 셰요 근데 셰요나 단단한도 진절라 암전 년바디 아니 내가 지게 와대 즉 수수 고도 피게 와대 하고 그러대 거나 안 진짜 용해야 돼다 펜토도 하고 그러
purpose benefit.
시험에 진짜 용해야 하마거나 진짜 용이 좋고 말이야 말아 다가라래 엄마 공발로 빼져 저부터 대대로 빼져 저부터 되나 아니 빼져다 수수 지워지기 하고 그거 와대 소르고면 와 아니 다 지금 디메베제 가서 베디에 메베체 아니 저러 메베 가돌라 아니 베자마 칼레라 로라 당고마 지금 어디 신기요 말아 다 비디 차상 개개인서 비디 차상 로자네 지글로인데 아니 시부지다 돈다야고 하고 인자 안다 개개인도 빼 거리 좀 진짜도 거리 좀 쉬어 안 진짜라 마셔와 도야 강에 메베 돈에 도야 디 연구도 와디 개침부 쉬어래 된 단도 센터 주나 주제요나 산이 제일 둔다 제마도야 그 진데기 롭젠데 피고 시행하듯 로네하고 로제 수수 가져 그거도 찍다더라 안 그거면 다 비디 진달래 사회 제일 찍로하더라 아니 가져 그거다 아니 진데 가져 펜토그 예매디 수수 냠냠전에 하고 그러 대하고나 아니 진데들라 찍 심띵네 미 가르라 말라다 수수 셈날라 지금 레기요다 지 가워로 지다 아니 지 수수 셈디 야게 두고요 가지다 아니 수수 들어와 수수 셔럽다 수수 셈이 셔럽셔도다 펜도 거라라 셔럽해야 되다 셔럽해서는 리비미시다 두스 셔도나 야고요레스로
It would be good to discuss what we've been through, these different characteristics of bodhisattvas, distinguishing them from the other vehicles, hearers and solitary realizers, in terms of entity, going through the Four Truths, each of which had four. But it would be also good to fill in what we've been through by reading through the sutras, because the way I taught it was quite giving like the quintessential part of each one. But it is very good to read between classes, to read the sutras and to know them. And this is because when you read over the sutras after class, it might flesh it out and you might think, oh, this relates to this is what I heard, and you gain a better understanding of it. If you just leave it and don't even look at the text, you won't feel that much when you come to class. You won't feel like there's a purpose or a benefit of coming to class. And I myself had this in the monastery when you know, if you didn't go to the debates or read the text, there was like a gap. But when we took the class from the teacher and we really listened to the subject material and we went back and read it and then we debated, then we would think that teacher was quite kind because of what we learned. So if you can, before class, sometimes read 4 or 5 pages, and then after class again read 4 or 5 pages, then you'll get some experience that is kind of beneficial to you. You know, whether you need to say that to others or not doesn't matter. But what's happening with you is you get a joy that you're increasing your knowledge, and a joy that you understand, and your wisdom increases. That can only help, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have a question?
Oh, all the sutras that we didn't go through, like these fleshy. No. The sutras in the book directly, not just the Heart Sutra. These are. Yeah.
And most people, you know, Chandra Machine, you know.
Yes.
Rinpoche, next class no coming. He continues teaching. Sometimes 3 hours teaching. You know, we no one give the complaint. No person, no one student never give complaint. Appreciate more. We were the extra 30-minute put here. How many people give me complaint? Me, I don't know. You need to understand those. Appreciate. If you have appreciate and less complaint, you did just go class, then you something little, you know, easy to come in your mind complaint.
I forgot to mention, it was said that the class became so interesting that you couldn't bear to miss. You don't want to miss the continuation of it? Yeah.
네,
Yeah,
네.
forgot to mention, yeah, sorry.
다들 샤워라.
Yeah, dedications.
Page 31 from the short mandala.
不许只是没头汤，为了灵性你得干宝的，上给心的没得苦啊吉，这个那个心了这把手。Realisation, number tune chochu chepatan, no something better me tasumki.
교회 묘세 다도 내 교지.
Page 33, prayers of dedication. Due to the merit of these virtuous actions, may I
Quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
May
The supreme joy of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise.
And may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Whatever slight positive potential I may
하나님의 단지의 바위에 고마드지 일하더니 가다는 시외너르니 시외서를 도와주시오 겨우디 유도다 남았습니다. 로제야마르 니르노쇼 천대로던 시쇼와단 주제노리로 여인은 아니야 단지도 주제고 외심하니 그만도 말해줘 이제를 정하는 셔베스데바데 된조지